Good morning. Buenos dias. Thank you for joining us. My name is Eric Olson. I'm the Associate Director of the Latin America Program here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And I want to welcome you to our panel on crime, violence, and insecurity in Central America. We're delighted to be joined today by our friends and partners and colleagues at the Vanderbilt University's Latin America Public Opinion Project. We had a tremendous response to our announcement of this event, and in typical Washington fashion, I suspect people will be filtering in here little by little, and we have an overflow room downstairs. So if you see chairs and so on that are open, please make them available to folks as they come wandering in. I want to just acknowledge a few of our visitors and guests. We're being joined today on the web by a webcast by tens of thousands of people around the world. No, that's probably not. That's a little exaggeration.
It's hundreds.
Boy, you are hundreds of thousands, millions. So welcome, folks that are joining us by the internet. And then also some distinguished guests who will probably be joining us soon. Right now we have the DCM from the Embassy of Honduras with us, Mr. Suazo. So thank you for coming. And also I just want to acknowledge a friend and a fearless leader, Cynthia Arnson, the director of the Latin America program, for her support for these activities. So thank you very much. And then our colleagues who have actually helped us put together these events, Veronica Colon in the back, and Christine Sano, and our interns, Meredith. Thank you all for your role in this. As anyone knows who is even remotely interested in Central America, Central America has sadly become known lately for its extreme violence, especially in the Northern Triangle. A region that's should be known, I think, for its beautiful beaches, great biodiversity, rich culture and history, premium coffee, and just a beautiful part of the world, has once again seen itself overshadowed by violence. And that is truly sad and unfortunate. Homicide rates are through the roof, especially in that Northern Triangle area of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And even though we begin to see some downturn in the rates of homicides in Guatemala and El Salvador, the average rates are still well above the regional average. So even where there's good news, it's still not the best. And those countries that aren't experiencing huge growth in homicides, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, are still experiencing serious threats to their own security, public security. Their coastal areas have become areas widely used by drug traffickers, and they're seeing increased consumption of drugs amongst their own populations. So it's a problem affecting all of the region, not just a couple of the countries. But the purpose of this event is not to look again at the homicide data and debate its reliability and what's driving it, but to look a little bit deeper at how Central Americans are perceiving this growing problem of insecurity. What are the various patterns of victimization? Is this an urban problem, a rural phenomenon? Where is this being felt most? What the impact of this violence is on citizens' trust in their own governments, in the institutions of governments, and ultimately, maybe the most important, what impacts it's having on democracy itself. Now, to assist us with this discussion, we're going to rely on the superb work of our friends from the Latin America Public Opinion Project at Vanderbilt University, and their outstanding and always fascinating surveys known as America's Barometer. I'm going to leave it to the panel, and especially Liz, to describe their work and how they've done it. But I just wanted to take a moment to introduce them so that you know who they are. There are longer bios in the back. Please take advantage of that. First, we'll hear from Liz Zechmeister, who is the Associate Director of the Latin America Public Opinion Program, as well as an Associate Professor of Political Science at Vanderbilt University. She's worked with the Public Opinion Project for 5 years. Her research focuses on comparative political behavior, especially in Latin America, including studies on voting, ideology, political parties, representation, charisma, and crisis. And most recently been looking at the public opinion consequences of security threats and natural disasters. Next, we'll hear from Jose Miguel Cruz, visiting assistant professor at Florida International University. He is among the most well-regarded, well-known Central American scholars in the United States. He has focused on issues of crime and violence in the region for many years and has developed particular expertise in the area of the gang phenomenon. He has been a consultant with the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Pan American Health Organization, UN Development Program, and many NGOs. He was also director of the University Institute of Public Opinion at the Universidad de Centroamérica in El Salvador, where he is from, and has overseen over 50 national surveys from 1994 to 2000 there at the UCA. Next, we'll hear from Susan Burke-Seligson, who is professor of Spanish linguistics and affiliate faculty member at the Center for Latin American Studies at Vanderbilt University. She's also a research associate with the Public Opinion Project and previously served as associate director of Vanderbilt's Center for Latin American Studies. She will discuss the results of a series of focus groups she conducted with at-risk youth in Central America. And last but not least, we thought it was really important to bring out an expert who has not participated directly in the public opinion surveys to provide his perspective, a good friend of the Wilson Center and the Latin American Program, Rodrigo Serrano Bertet, from the World Bank. He's a senior social development specialist for the Latin American and Caribbean region at the World Bank, and has been one of the bank's leading experts on citizen security, crime, and violence prevention issues throughout the region, but especially Central America. And he oversees a lending portfolio that includes much of Central America, Mexico, and Brazil. We know him here because of his fine work and co-authorship with Humberto Lopez of a book or a volume manuscript called Crime and Violence in Central America, a Development Challenge. If you don't know that report, I would certainly highly recommend it. He presented it here at the Wilson Center a couple of years ago now, I guess. So we thought it was so valuable to have him participate as a commentator, a discussant, that we were willing to bend to his schedule a little bit. He has an important meeting back at the World Bank at 11 o'clock, so if he sneaks out the back door, you'll understand he's doing it for that reason and not out of disgust or dismay. So thank you all very much. So I turn it over to Liz. We will have plenty of time, I believe, at the end for your questions. And thank you all. Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, you want to dance?
Thanks, Eric. And thanks, Cynthia, for having us here. We're really happy to be here at the Wilson Center today. Thanks to the staff who worked hard to get us here and to set up this event for today. As Eric said, we're going to talk about crime, violence, and insecurity in Central America. And what I want to do first is just tell you a little bit about the project from which these data come. So this is the Latin American Public Opinion Project and our regional barometer, the Americas Barometer. The Americas Barometer is supported by a number of important institutions and universities. Of course, we want to recognize our core support from USAID. They are our core supporters for this project. We also receive important support from Vanderbilt University, which is where the project is based. We want to thank the Tinker Foundation. So if you're drinking coffee or eating pastries this morning, that is thanks to the Tinker Foundation. So thanks to the Tinker Foundation for that and for their other support for this project. And as you can see, we receive support from a number of other institutions and universities. So this is truly a collaborative project, and it looks even more collaborative when I turn to the next slide, which is a slide showing all of our partners across the Americas. So as I said, LAPOP Central is located at Vanderbilt University, and from there we oversee the development, implementation, and analysis of surveys across the region. But we do so with the help of our partners, and we've splashed up these logos here, so they're sort of overwhelming, but I wanted to give you a sense of the extensive network that we manage and work with across the Americas. The Americas Barometer is a regional survey, began in 2004. LAPOP dates back decades before 2004, but in 2004, the project came together with a common core of surveys being implemented in a subset of countries in the Americas to try to give us a sense of the pulse of democratic politics in the region. And then over the years, we've expanded the project so that in 2010 and in 2012, we conducted national surveys in 26 countries in the Americas. Canada, the United States are included. We go through Central America, Argentina, and out into the Caribbean, where we hit some of the major countries with the exception of Cuba, and of course up in North America with the exception of Greenland. We're working first on Cuba, then maybe we'll work on Greenland. In 2012, as I said, we covered 26 countries for a total of 41,632 interviews. And each of these national surveys comes with a margin of error. And so you'll see as we present statistics that we present our survey estimates with a confidence interval, a plus or minus a little, right? The entire time series for the Americas Barometer from 2004 to 2012 consists of over 170,000 interviews, and all these data are available online. As I said, we conduct national surveys. These are nationally representative surveys. The surveys are complex. They're stratified. The sample is stratified, clustered according to best practices, but we cover the entire country. So we survey in easy to access, densely populated urban areas like you see here on the screen in Bolivia, and we also survey in more remote regions like the dispersed rural region in Bolivia that you see on the screen here. We manage quality control at all points in the project, and we put a lot of effort into this. So each round of the Americas Barometer is preceded by a number of procedures. One is the training of all the interviewers. So even if we're sending seasoned interviewers out into the field, these are nationals interviewing in their own country, we send our team down to train them according to our standardized manual, so we're following common procedures across all the countries. We pre-test extensively, starting in a few countries and rolling out into all of the countries in the Americas. And each time we pre-test, we change or tweak the core survey as appropriate. And so just to give you a sense of what that involves, in 2012, we changed or tweaked the core survey over 1,100 times. And you see here some pictures of pre-testing in Honduras, in Costa Rica, in Mexico, and then training in Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic. And what you can see here is one of our team members, this is a graduate student, listening in on a pre-test conducted by an interviewer from Costa Rica interviewing this woman here. So that's how we do the pre-testing. It's iterative and it's intense so that we can get a good sense of what the interviewee is understanding as we ask the questions, and we can adjust as needed, and then we adjust for the entire core so that the question is the same across all countries, with question wording changing as appropriate for each country. We also change the language where appropriate, so where appropriate we send out bilingual interviewers and allow the interview to take place in whichever language the individual is accustomed to speaking about politics in. One of the things that facilitates this is our use of handheld electronic devices or smartphones. So in the majority of the countries in which we survey, we use smartphone technology with a platform developed first by our partners at the University of Costa Rica and now by our partners in Cochabamba, Bolivia, who have developed this Android platform that allows us to do a number of things, including, as I said, switch languages mid-interview. We can embed experiments, and we do. We can customize it for each country and in other ways. And we reduce data entry errors so that if someone out in the field with a paper and pencil survey might have marked down a 1 and the person back in the home office coded that as a 7, that doesn't happen with the PDAs. And so we reduce the noise that we're gathering in the field to get more precise estimates of the democratic political culture and experiences in the Americas. As I mentioned, the data are all available online, and so are the reports. So all of our reports are available in PDF format online for free downloads, and you can access the data online. You can access the data in 2 ways. First, thanks to the Tinker Foundation again, we now have the raw data files for every survey from the America's Barometer time series available online for download in SPSS or STATA format. And for those who are not so technically inclined, there's an interactive data analysis website that you can access on our website so that you can query the data. You can pull up a mean on a given question for a country, for the set of countries, and you can even do more complex things. Let me move forward and start talking about crime, insecurity, and violence. And I'm just going to make a couple of points before I turn the floor over to my colleagues here. The first one is to bring a spotlight to variation not only across countries, but within countries when we talk about crime, violence, and insecurity in the region. And so I'll start just by talking a little bit about insecurity. In the America's Barometer survey, we asked people about their experiences with crime, but we also asked them about how secure they are in their own neighborhood. So we asked them, speaking of the neighborhood where you live and thinking about the possibility of being assaulted or robbed, that is a victim of a violent crime, do you feel safe, very safe, somewhat unsafe, or very unsafe? And what we've done here is we've taken that question and we've rescaled the answers to run from 0 to 100, and we're showing you mean values across the countries of the Americas. And so what you see is when we look at the national average, Peru's at the top, up with Venezuela, Bolivia, Haiti, and then we see the countries of Central America where that are some of the areas of greatest concern a little bit further down on the list of countries that are, countries' mean levels of insecurity, right? So what happens when we change our perspective a little bit? Here we're looking at just the national capitals. And so you can see that the ordering of the countries has shifted somewhat. So the point is that national averages can mask significant variation across countries. So we have to be careful when we talk about a national statistic or a statistic that applies to the metropolitan area. These can be very different. And here you see a shifting of countries. So some of the difference in rankings is due to this difference in the mean levels of insecurity across the national capitals. In this case, those national capitals with the highest levels of insecurity in our survey are Mexico City, Lima, Guatemala City, and Caracas. Continuing on with this point of variation within countries, when we look at size of town and people's reporting of experiences with violent crime, we also see significant variation. So we ask people whether or not in the past 12 months they've been the victim of a crime, and then we follow up and ask them about that last experience that they had and whether or not that experience was related to a robbery, an assault, or a kidnapping. And what you can see here on this chart, we're showing you percentages across all 24 countries in the Americas, excluding the US and Canada. 5.3% of people who live in rural areas report having been the victim of a violent crime. This is an average across the region. And we compare that to 11.8% in the national capital. If we look just at the Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, Salvador, and Honduras, we see 7% on average report being the victim of a violent crime in rural areas, and that jumps up to 19.7% in the metropolitan capitals on average across those 3 countries. So again, significant variation within countries by the place in which individuals live. When we then look at that same statistic, citizen-reported violent crime victimization across national capitals in the Americas, we again see this variation across countries, and we can see here that Honduras and the capital of Honduras, capital of Guatemala, and the capital of Mexico are at the top of those countries in terms of their ranking of the percentage of people who have been victims of violent crime in the past year. Here's another way to look at this same point, which is, again, about variation within countries. So here we're mapping the percentage of victims of violent crime by the region in which the individual lives within Guatemala. And what you can see here and what it says on the slide is that violent crime is 5 times higher in Guatemala City compared to the northern zones of that country. So again, the point that there's significant variation within countries. Same thing when we look at El Salvador. The rates of violent crime victimization are much higher in the metropolitan area than they are in other parts of the country. Now here's Honduras. In Honduras, we see a much more even distribution of violent crime experiences across the country. So not only do we see variation within country, but we see that that variation varies across countries. Now I just want to say a few words about the political implications of crime and insecurity. So we hear a lot about the economic implications and, of course, the human implications and the social implications. And I wanted to bring the focus a little bit onto the implications with respect to democratic political culture. And I'm just going to show you some correlations in the data set. So the first slide here looks at life satisfaction as the dependent variable. We ask people to begin, in general, how satisfied are you with your life today? And this is also what some people would call a happiness indicator or contentedness indicator. And we can see a significant negative relationship between life satisfaction and perception of insecurity, so that the more insecure you feel, try to find the red dot there, the lower your level of life satisfaction. Here, if you've been the victim of a crime, you have lower levels of life satisfaction than someone who has not been the victim of a crime. So let's move over to politics. Presidential approval. This is a relationship that, from the perspective of democratic accountability, is not a bad relationship to find, right? Those who are more insecure, those who have been victims of crime, are lower on this 0 to 100 scale, where we're measuring presidential approval, than those who have not been the victim of a crime and those who are more secure. So we see a relationship in the data between insecurity and crime and presidential approval. Again, as I said, that's not a bad thing to find. That means that the public may be holding the executive accountable for bad times, and if executives are responsive, that can induce a sort of virtuous cycle of accountability and progress. We also find a relationship, though, between insecurity and crime when it comes to one of our leading indicators of democratic stability in the region. So we've taken five questions from the America's Barometer survey and created an index of system support or political legitimacy. So we asked people about their sense of sort of trust, confidence, and pride in the country's institutions. So not just the executive, but the country's institutions as a whole, or at a larger level, going up a level, right? We ask to what extent do you think that the courts guarantee a fair trial? To what extent do you respect the political institutions of the country? To what extent do you think that citizens' basic rights are protected by the system of this country? To what extent do you feel proud of living under the political system of this country? And to what extent do you think that one should support the political system of this country? And we combine those into an index, an additive index, and we again scale from 0 to 100, which is typical of our studies. And we're going to look at it with respect to insecurity and crime victimization again. And what you can see is that those with higher perceptions of insecurity, so lower levels of security, have lower levels of system support. And those who have been victims of crime also have lower levels of system support. So this gives us some indication that crime victimization and insecurity may erode system support, political legitimacy itself, which, as I said, is part of our two-dimensional sort of construct that we use to measure and to keep track of political stability in the region. So the concern is that people's experiences with crime, their concerns about insecurity can erode system support and possibly, therefore, also chip away at political stability in the region. And analyses that I'm not going to show here, we can show similar relationships to other measures in the data set, such as support for the rule of law, which also is lower for those who have high levels of insecurity and have experienced crime in the past 12 months. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miguel Cruz.
Before we do that, I just want to acknowledge that Ambassador Francisco Alchus has joined us. Ambassador, welcome. There's a seat up here for you if you'd like. I know you're very modest, but thank you for joining us today. And I don't know if Ambassador Mendez from Belize has arrived or not. Okay, thank you. Miguel?
Thank you. I want to thank first to the Woodrow Wilson Center and LAPOP for having this seminar here. I think this is an important opportunity to discuss some of the results of LAPOP around crime and violence. Actually, what we're presenting here is just a small part of what LAPOP has done in terms of crime and violence, of all the questions related to crime and violence. We couldn't squeeze everything here in this kind of half an hour, 45 minutes presentation. So there are many more things in the questionnaire that we can later speak about. So I'm going to present something related to crime and violence, but taking a sort of a view on the police. The police play an important role in, as we all know, in crime and violence in Central America. But I want to show that the importance of the police goes beyond just enforcing the law, preventing crime, but also it has an important impact over the political system in Central America and over stability in the political system in Central America. So I'm going to be presenting actually data from 2008 and 2012. The first part will be on 2008, because in 2008, we included some questions that asked the people about what we say the dark behavior of the police in Central America. In 2012, I'm going to focus on questions that have to do with community policing, with involvement of the police in the community. Let me go with the dark side first. And then in 2008, we included a set of questions regarding corruption by the police, abuse by the police, and involvement in crime of the police in Central America. And you can see the questions that we use over there. For instance, for corruption, and this is a question we have been using all along the LAPOP, the America's Barometer surveys. We included this question: has a police officer asked you for a bribe in the last 12 months, right? In terms of abuse, we asked, in the past 12 months, has any police officer abused you verbally, physically, or assaulted you? In terms of involvement in crime, that turned out to be a quite significant question. We some people say that the police in this neighborhood protect people from criminals, while others say that it's the police that are involved in crime. What do you think? The police protect people, or rather, police are involved in crime? So we put together all those results, and we create a sort of single indicator. And remember, these are data from 2008, right? And we compare the five of the countries in Central America, and you can see very clearly, for instance, that in case of the Northern Triangle, you have high levels of what I call police misconduct in Central America. And it's an important difference between the northern part of Central America and the southern part of Central America, especially in Nicaragua and in Costa Rica. In Guatemala, percentage of people who have, to some extent, suffered either abuse, corruption, or have perceived the police involved in crime in their own community is very high. It's almost 60%. In the other two countries, it's around 50%. Against 30%, a third part in southern Central America. Now, where is this most common? Well, police misconduct is more frequently reported by young adult males, so that doesn't come as a surprise. Actually, young adult males, basically, young people are more subjected to, to be stopped by the police. And during those events, well, the police tend to either abuse, ask for bribes, or be in more relationship with the people. So you can see over there very clearly that especially males tend to suffer more police misconduct than older people. And also, police misconduct is more reported by people residing in urban areas in whole Central America. In general, and the literature talks about a lot of this. We know that police misconduct erodes people's trust in the police, right? It doesn't come as a surprise that those who have been abused or have been victims of corruption from the police will have less trust in the police. But what it comes with a sort of surprise is that the data also shows that police misconduct erodes the legitimacy of the whole political system. I mean, every time the police are involved or are perceived as involved in crime, in corruption, in abuse, well, they not only erode the political system, the trust in the police itself, in the institution, but also in the whole political system. So it's affecting the overall legitimacy of the system. And this, you can see this even in singular events. For instance, in the case of police abuse in El Salvador. In El Salvador, police abuse erodes support for the political system. In Nicaragua, for instance, police corruption also erodes, police bribery erodes support for the political system in these countries. And here comes an interesting data. Here, and I'm sorry for using this kind of graph, where this is basically a regression when I plug together many variables that are believed to be related with support for the system. And what I want to show you is the importance of police misconduct over the overall legitimacy in the political system. So basically, this is a regression that shows the coefficients over there here. And to the extent that these things are farther from the red line, the variable is more important. So here, I have put the usual suspects of affecting the support for the political system, right? For instance, education, level of wealth, perceptions of the economy, crime victimizations, perception of insecurity that Liz just talked about, people who voted for the incumbent, and police misconduct. So of all those variables, actually police misconduct has an important weight over the legitimacy of the political system, even more than perception of insecurity. Usually when we talk about the impact of crime and violence in Central America, we focus on the impact of insecurity, of crime, right? But actually, when we measure what is the impact of the role of the police even turn out to be even more significant than the whole perception of insecurity. So what does that mean? That means that the police are important, that the police are even more important than we usually suspect. Because we're not only talking about law enforcement, we're also talking about providing stability to the whole political system. Okay, now we switch to 2012 with data on 2012, and here I will focus on more of this data of police involvement in the communities, rather the bright side of police behavior in Central America. But before that, let me show you just this graph showing just the data on corruption of the police for 2012. And as we can see, well, basically, police corruption is still a significant problem in northern Central America, so 2012, especially in Guatemala and Honduras. So, for instance, in the case of Honduras, 17%, in the case of Guatemala, 17% of the people, almost 18% of the people reported being victims of a bribe. In the case of Honduras, it's 16%. Now, although that is happening. Also, some community policing programs are driving police institutions closer to the community. There are some important efforts in the region, in some countries in the region, basically to put the police in the community and to relate with people in the community. So we test that in 2 countries, actually. We couldn't include those questions in all countries in Central America. Unfortunately, we just did it for El Salvador and Panama, and we included this question. Have you seen the police talking with people in this neighborhood? Have you seen the police attending neighborhood meetings? Have you seen the police helping in crime prevention activities? Have you seen the police relating to children and youth in this neighborhood? So we put all that together and create a single indicator. But before that, let me just show the data for every of those questions. For instance, for instance, police attending community meetings, 38% in El Salvador against 26% in Panama. Police interacting with children and youth, 20% in El Salvador, 10% in Panama, and so on. Police contributing to prevention, police talking with people, a little bit more in El Salvador than in Panama. What is showing, basically, there is an important effort in these 2 countries to have the police involved in community issues. Recent programs in El Salvador and Panama are getting the police involved in community affairs, though to different degrees. Definitely in El Salvador, there is more involvement in the police than in Panama, especially in communities with high levels of citizen participation. So what this means is that in those communities in which there are already in place strong civic participation, citizen participation, well, the police tend to relate better with people over there, and rural communities. And this comes as an interesting data because, as we saw, most of crime and most of insecurity is concentrated in the urban areas, whereas the police, most of the work the police are conducting in terms of involvement with the community is focused on rural areas in El Salvador as well as in Panama. Now, however, when we test whether this involvement of the police have any impact in terms of crime victimization or insecurity, as of now, as of 2012, we don't see any impact. But this could be rather, early in testing this. I mean, we still have to let some of these programs that were put in place quite recently, we have to let some time to pass. But as of now, we don't see any difference in terms of impact, in terms of insecurity, on reducing insecurity or reducing crime victimization. What we see, though, is that it has a significant impact in trust in the police. So people in those communities in which the police are more involved trust more the police, much more than in those communities in which they don't. You can see here in this line, police involvement in the community where it's non-involvement against where it's low involvement and high involvement. You can see the trust in the police going up very significantly. But not only that, we also see that the police involvement in the community has an important impact in terms of, again, the legitimacy of the political system. So what the lesson here is that it's good to have the police involved in community affairs, not only in terms of, for the future, in terms of crime prevention and security, but also to provide trust to the whole political system as a first important step to move towards a strategy that involves the citizenry to combat crime. So in sum, the police play an important role in the legitimacy of the political system. Police abuse and corruption are detrimental not only to the police, but also to the citizen support for the regime. Police involvement in community increases citizen accountability, boosts political trust, and contributes to political legitimacy. And finally, although community policing does not seem to make a difference in terms of security, it is helping to restore citizen trust in political institutions. And I'll stop here and turn to Susan. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Wilson Center for inviting us here. I'd like to talk about another project that LAPOP has been involved in apart from the Americas Barometer. This is a study of crime and violence mitigation in Central America. We started off by focusing on 3 countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Panama, but we've now extended the project to Honduras and beyond Central America to Mexico. But I want to talk today about the 3 original countries that I've worked in. And I'm going to be talking about the qualitative component of this larger study. The larger study is quantitative. This study has now interviewed almost 18,000 people, and it's not over yet because it's a 3-year study, and there are still a third wave of studies to go in this current year. The quantitative study uses a survey instrument that is highly structured. It's got fixed item questions with closed-ended possibilities for answers. My part of the project is the qualitative part, which is a semi-structured kind of approach to interviewing, where we do ask a certain series of questions, but we leave the answers to be open-ended, and we do encourage people to go on and elaborate and explain their answers. So we want to go into in more depth into what they're thinking when they answer what they're thinking. And in the qualitative component, our projected totals will be 790, well, as of now, 790 people at the moment, in one-to-one individual interviews and 20 focus groups. I'll be talking about both the individual interviews and focus groups today. I'm not limiting myself to the focus groups, all right? And when I say that we interview people, this is not now house-to-house random interviewing, but rather selected people in the community. We are looking at the stakeholders, specifically police officers, school directors and school teachers, community development leaders, clergy, who are very important in their leadership roles, youth at risk, and people in the municipalities who are involved in violence and crime mitigation. I do want to look at 2 aspects of the crime mitigation focus of this project. And that is the role of the police. I'm following up on what Miguel Cruz has said, and I'll be looking at the role of the schools. I'm finding that community policing is found variably in all 3 countries that we're studying in. It's found least in Guatemala and most in El Salvador. So it's not a matter of is there community policing going on. It's not yes or no. It's not a dichotomous variable. It's really the degree to which community policing is going on. It's a continuum. To some extent, community policing is going on in all 3 countries. And evidence of community policing in all 3 countries is the fact that the police show up in the public schools. They guard the entrances to the schools as the kids come in and leave school. They're guarding the children from the gang members who hang around outside the school, ready to try to seduce them into joining their gangs or trying to extort money from them or whatever else they want to do with them. So they're trying to keep the children of the school safe from the gang members who hang around outside the school. The police also come into the schools to talk to the parents. They give the parents lectures. They give talks to the children, explaining to the children as well as to the parents the dangers of joining gangs, the dangers of using illegal drugs and overuse of alcohol. Basically they're doing an educational function. Now, how often do the police do that in a given school? Well, it varies from twice a year to maybe 4 times a year. It depends. It's not something that goes on every day. And the police are not at the doors of every school every day of the week either. In some places it's twice a week, some have it 3 times a week. It's variable. All of this is variable, okay? It's not a matter of do they or do they not. It's how much do they do it, okay? Okay, let me give you some examples of the 3 specific countries. Sorry.
Go back.
Yeah. Yeah, the next one. I'll go forward. Yeah. I'm pushing the button. Okay, yeah. So in Guatemala, what's the evidence of community policing? It's not simply in the schools, but they have these programs that have a name. La Policía es tu amigo, and Escuela Segura, and DARE, which is Dare to Say No, which is another way of saying just say no to drugs. And in addition, the Guatemalan police report that they collaborate with these juntas locales de seguridad, the security committees of the local community development associations, which are called COCODES in Guatemala. In Panama, there's an interesting pilot program that joins the police with the community called Rendición de Cuentas. This is accountability. And it's accountability that goes in two directions. The police are accountable to the community, and the community is accountable to the police. And so there are meetings once a month now in Panama City, and this is organized by the University of Panama, by the way, in which the police report to the community what they have done in the previous month in terms of violence prevention. And at the same time, at these meetings, the community reports to the police on what they have observed, have noticed. In effect, they're giving intelligence to the police. So this is a two-way street. And this is conjoined with the Vecino Vigilante program, which is basically a neighborhood watch program. But they're teaching people to be watchful everywhere. So they're calling themselves Vecino Vigilante, Chofer Vigilante, Empresario Vigilante. Everyone's vigilante. Everyone's supposed to be on the watch. And they designate these little terms to every sector of society they can come up with. So they're telling everyone to be vigilant, to watch out, and to tell the police when they see something. So basically, it's if you see something, do something, as the New York City subway signs now say. Okay. Well, there is community policing going on, but despite that, the opinions of these stakeholders about the police are mixed. Some people say that most of the police can be trusted, but that some are corrupt. And the ones who are corrupt because they're working in league with youth gangs or organized crime. Okay? Other people are saying that on the whole, the police cannot be trusted. What I'm seeing is a pattern here. I'm seeing that the stakeholders who work most closely with at-risk youth, the ones who are doing the crime mitigation projects, the ones who really work one-on-one with young people in the communities, these are the people who are least trustful of the police. They're the ones who say the most negative things about the police. They're the ones who report that when they see 3 kids standing in a corner at night in their community, the police will come over there and start searching them and roughing them up, whether they're in a gang or not. Because actually in Central America, if you're 3 young people standing in a corner, that constitutes a gang. That's the definition of gang, 3 or more people in a group standing around. So whether you're in a gang or not, and whether you have tattoos or not, and whether you have tattoos but you're not in a gang, you're still going to be the object of the attention of the police. And the people who work with young people in crime mitigation are very upset to see and hear that the police treat the youths indiscriminately in a negative fashion. Okay? I also noticed that the stakeholders, specifically community leaders, who live in communities where gangs are embedded in the communities, these are the people who tend to be more negative toward the police because these gang members are the children of their neighbors. These gang members are the friends of their own kids. We interviewed a Catholic priest who said, yeah, when he was young, all his friends were gang members. He did not join the gangs because his mother was very strict with him, he reports. His mother would ask him, now, what did you do today? Who were you with today? He became a priest. But because he didn't do those things. But his friends were all gang members, he reports. Okay, so this is what comes out of the qualitative interviews, stories like this. So what is the consequence of this mistrust? The consequence is the fear of reporting crimes to the police. People are afraid to report crimes. It's called denuncia. They don't want to do when we ask them, have you ever done a denuncia? Most people will say no. And why don't they go and do a denuncia at the police station? Because they're afraid that those police officers who they speak to, who turn out to be corrupt if they don't know it, will then report this to the suspect in the case who was detained, who in turn afterwards, when he's released from the jail or just from the police station, will retaliate against the person who reported him. So it's fear of retaliation. It's fear of paying the consequences having reported someone as having committed a crime. So some community leaders say that they will report crimes only to specific police officers, namely the ones they know personally and can trust. They will not go down to a police station and indiscriminately just report a crime to protect themselves. Okay, now, in a place like Guatemala, what happens is that when you don't trust in the police, and this is where mistrust of the police is particularly high, what happens is you get taking the law into your own hands. And this has been called, alternatively, vigilante justice, lynching, and I don't mean necessarily hanging someone up by a rope, but lynching in Central America can mean simply burning somebody alive or beating them to death. Okay? It's also called informal justice. Beyond these 3 countries where we're doing the systematic work over a 3-year period, we've been asked to do a special study of violence in one particular place in Guatemala, and this is Coban, in the Department of Alta Verapaz, because there was a stage of siege in Coban in the spring of 2011, and we at LAPOP were asked to do a special study there. So we did focus groups because that's what we were asked to do. We did 8 focus groups. And we found that people reported that the most common crimes were pickpocketing and purse snatching and extortion. They said that extortion goes on a daily basis and that it's coming mainly from the jails out to the communities. People said that relatives are extorting money from relatives, from one another, from family members. And what was really interesting was that some police officers, they said, act as, quote, negotiators between the extortionist and the victim. And the negotiation means reducing the fee that the extortionist is demanding. So in the process, it became quite clear that the person reporting this means that the police negotiator is receiving a sum of money for his effort. In other words, there's a kickback. So if you get the extortionists to reduce the amount of money from 20,000 quetzales to 5 quetzales, you get back maybe 5 quetzales. So you get something for your effort as a negotiator. So this is what we mean by police corruption. This is one form of police corruption. There are barriers to police effectiveness. There's a language barrier in Guatemala. In Guatemala, they speak about 13, 15 indigenous languages. Some police officers in Guatemala are bilingual. However, we found that the police officers in Guatemala are rotated very frequently, maybe even every 3 months, certainly every 6 months. And the rotation is definitely to keep down the level of corruption on the part of the police. They figure if people can't spend too long in any one place, they can't get deeply involved in corruption there because it takes time to form those networks. So if you're a police officer who happens to be bilingual in an indigenous language and you're moved to another part of the country where they don't speak your indigenous language, you're not going to be able to deal with taking the law into your own hands in an indigenous community. So this is what the indigenous leaders are complaining about, that the police don't speak the language of their community. There's an important institution in Guatemala called COCODES, and this is the Community Development Association, okay? And their job is to basically, they're law enforcement personnel. They are officially given the right to keep the peace in their communities. They are allowed to detain people. They're allowed to call the police when they see the need for the police. However, they're also there to keep the levels of taking the law into your own hands down to a minimum. Because when people start gathering together and want to burn somebody alive, it's the job of the COCODES to come in and intervene and stop this and bring the real authorities in. However, the COCODES people say that they are often unable to stop what's going on. They don't have the power to stop a mob mentality. The police report that they do not do patrolling in distant communities. They're not doing community policing in far-off communities. And why is that? Because they're afraid of the communities. So here it's the mirror opposite. We say that people are afraid of the police. Here the police are afraid of the people. And that's why they don't go into those communities. They are letting the communities take over the law enforcement job because they're afraid to go. Because when they do go in and there's a mob trying to lynch somebody, the people attack the police physically. So that's why they don't want to go in there. So the COCODES has an arm called the Junta de Seguridad or Comité de Seguridad, Security Committee, which is in charge of law enforcement. And these committees patrol at night. They do night patrols. Okay, just to give you an explanation of who the COCODES are, they are quasi-judicial operators. These Community Development Association leaders are given the status of highest authority in their communities, and they have para-police roles. They can detain crime suspects. They also have lower-level judicial roles. They can decide whether or not the National Civil Police needs to be called in to make an arrest. And as community leaders, they report to the municipality's council, the comudes, which includes police chiefs on its council. So there's this interrelationship between the cocodes, the comudes, and the police. There's this interrelationship between the three units. Okay, so why do people take the law into their own hands in Guatemala? They say it's because the people are slow in arriving at the crime scenes, if they arrive at all. Sometimes they never show up. And they're ineffectual because they don't speak the languages of the people, the indigenous people who live in these communities. And the description of the function of this Junta de Seguridad in these communities, which is part of the COCODES structure, is that when they patrol at night, they wear ski masks. They are hiding their identities. Some of them, the focus group leaders told us, are armed. Now, this is illegal. They're not supposed to be armed, but some of them are. So there is this danger that people are going around with ski masks. The suspects, the people suspected of perpetrating a crime, go around in ski masks at night. So the danger is that someone in a ski mask will shoot at someone with a ski mask and will be shooting someone from his own community or another COCODES community. And so that's why one community leader said that going around armed at night is not a good thing. They should not be doing. They should be following the laws of Guatemala. Yet some of these comités are not. Okay. Just to go quickly into what happens in the capital, in Coban, the capital city of the area. Big business owners feel that the police are ineffectual. They don't trust the police. They have no confidence in the police. They get their own guards. They don't even go to guard companies anymore. They don't hire security guard companies because they don't trust them because they're corrupt. So they get together their own security group. How this is done, we don't know. This should be explored. But they don't trust anybody, the big business owners. So they're getting together their own security teams. And they admit in the focus groups that they have threatened extortionists who are currently in jail. They threaten the extortionists with a taste of their own medicine. They say to them that if they continue to extort them, they will kidnap their loved ones, that is the extortionist loved ones, and possibly murder them. So they're now threatening the extortionists with the kinds of threats that extortionists make against the people. Okay. So to get into the second case study, it's what's happening in the schools in terms of violence mitigation. And I want to go into El Salvador specifically because they're doing a lot. There's a new program that's been around since 2007 called Convivencia Escolar, which means really peaceful coexistence. It means a culture of peace, a culture of harmony in the schools. I think it's copied after a program that's currently in place in Chicago. This is teaching school children values and attitudes and lifestyles to reduce violence and promote peaceful coexistence. It's to develop student leadership, to produce positive behavior toward your classmates, to be proactive. And I think proactive, by that they do mean if you see something, do something. These students are told to report to the administration when they see a crime going on. If they hear of something about to go on, they're supposed to be giving intelligence to the school principals, and they're trained to do that. And one of the goals of the violence prevention program is to get the parents involved with the school, with the kids. One way of getting parents involved is to get the parents to sign cartas de compromiso. The parents have to sign letters saying that they commit themselves to paying attention to their child's obligations toward the school, and the letters are drawn up when a student is suspended temporarily. There's also an Escuela para Padres y Madres. This is adult education for parents, in which teachers and people from outside the community, like the police, come and tell parents about the dangers of child abuse, the dangers of addictive drugs, of excessive use of alcohol, of gang membership. Okay, one aspect of violence mitigation and in the long run is to get kids to finish school, to get them to graduate from high school. Because if they graduate from high school, they can get a decent job. If they can get a decent job, that might keep them away from gangs. So the whole goal of the school is to get the kids to graduate. But there have been some barriers to graduation. in the past, the schools have suspended kids from anywhere between a day and a week, which has meant sending the kids home. Sending the kids home has been pushing them into the hands of the gangs, actually. So this is no longer a policy. You cannot send kids home today in El Salvador if they do bad things. Today, there's a school psychologist in place, and these people are really highly valued. I've heard the best things about this program. The school psychologists are now teaching the school administrators and teachers in mediation. This is conflict resolution, alternative conflict resolution. So instead of hitting kids, which has been the policy in the past, instead of preventing them from going out to school recess, which teachers have been doing, in El Salvador right now, you can't prohibit kids from having their recreational recesses. You can't hit them anymore. Now there's a school psychologist who will talk to them, who gives therapy, who teaches the teachers and the school administrators on how to behave toward the kids, to talk to them. There's mediation going on at all levels, and they're training children in mediation. They're training the school leaders, the best kids in the school, to be mediators among kids who are having conflict. And the psychologists are giving clinical therapy to the kids who are most at risk, who are having behavioral problems in the school. So there's a major change going on in El Salvador in the school system because of the role of the psychologists. The one thing that's interesting about finishing the school goal is that there's always a state of flux in the schools. Children suddenly don't come to school anymore, and you don't know if they've dropped out or not. They don't tell the teachers where they're going, what they're going to do. The principals only find one day that the kids are gone. They don't know what happened to them. What's happening is that while you cannot expel a student from a school in El Salvador today, you can exert enough pressure on the parents that the parents will take the kid out of the school. And that's what's happening. So kids who have become violent in the school, and the school cannot do anything about this, will put pressure on the parents to get the kids out of the school, not formally, officially, but informally, and they manage to do this. So what happens to these kids? Either they drop out completely, or the parents send them to another school. When they get sent to another school, if the other parents in the school perceive that this kid who's new to the school is a gang member, they'll pull their kids out of the school. So for any one kid who seems to be a gang member who gets into another school, the teachers say 15 other kids drop out of the school. So you're getting this musical chairs kind of phenomenon. A new kid comes in who's perceived to be a gang member, and a bunch of kids leave the school. And since the schools don't keep track of who's actually dropping out, who's going where, the school doesn't know what happened to these kids. There's no reporting of these events. So these are the kinds of things a qualitative study has been finding, which I think are interesting, and I'd be happy to answer questions later about this.
Thank you, Susan. Now we'll hear from our friend Rodrigo.
Thank you, Eric. I would like to thank Eric and the Woodrow Wilson for allowing me to say a few words on this very interesting presentation, and congratulate the University of Vanderbilt and LAPOP for this fascinating work that has been doing over the last, since 2004. I would like to organize my comments in basically three parts. First, reflect a little bit on the use and the value that this type of work has for organizations like the World Bank. Then make a few comments on some of the findings, and lastly, pose a few questions and observations on the methodology. On the value, I'd say, there is an obvious benefit for us, which is to allow us to have a sort of a cross-national perspective beyond homicides. When we have to present sort of this kind of diagnosis for managers on what's happening in the region, there is a tendency to have this reductionist view and talk only about homicides, because we know that that's sort of the most reliable data come from homicides, and then there is sort of this, and that gives us an important sort of distribution of the problem, but it's only partial. I think initiatives like LAPOP have really allowed us to not just do the ranking of the countries by homicide, but also do two other rankings which are very interesting. One is the one on sort of perceptions of insecurity and what is it that people consider to be the most pressing problem in their country. and or to what extent crime is one of the most pressing problems. And when you see those two compared, the homicide and then to what extent crime is one of is the most pressing problem, you see a very different ranking. And I'm from Argentina. I've always was struck to see that, in the first map you see Argentina at the bottom. We have like 5 per 100,000 homicides. Now, in the crime as the most important problem in your country, usually it's been at the top. Now I saw in 2012 it's a little bit lower, but still, I mean, much more than what just looking at homicides will tell you. And I think part of the answer to this is in the third ranking that LAPOP provides, which is the victimization survey, which is, okay, let's look at all the other types of violent crimes that citizens suffer from. And there you see, for instance, that in Argentina, crime victimization is pretty high in the ranking sort of countries in the region. So, this has been, it's a terrific effort, I think, and we are very lucky in the region to have instruments like this. I was also very happy to see that now Vanderbilt and LAPOP are including these evaluations of specific interventions, like this school violence prevention program, because this is something that we really need. We need much more of. I mean, there is a dearth of evidence in the region on what works and what doesn't work in terms of dealing with this problem. And this is something that we are investing heavily in the bank and collaborating with other partners. And just a public service announcement on this. We are launching very soon sort of what we call a knowledge network on citizen security, which basically tries to deal with this problem of the lack of evidence. And basically we're trying to do two things. One is make more available all the evidence that exists in countries like the US and in a few countries in Latin America on interventions and the effectiveness of different types of interventions. In the US you have crimesolutions.gov, which is a fantastic, and other websites like that are a fantastic resource in terms of getting a sense of really what the evidence tells us about what works in dealing with this problem. And so seeing what of this evidence base can be useful to guide policymakers at the municipal level, at the national level, in the region, I think it's a very important task that we have, and we want to facilitate that process. And the second one is to do a little bit of what LAPOP was presenting today, is to do more evaluations of the things that are being tried, and many interesting and innovative things that are happening in our region. On the findings, just sort of 3 comments. I thought it was very interesting the comments that Miguel was these findings on the work on community policing, and I mean, if we put it in the literature of community policing, mostly, I mean, in the U.S., you see that there are some similarities and differences. I mean, there are some similarities in the sense that they also found, consistently with the literature here, that more community policing improves citizens' trust in the police. The difference is, but at the same time, it doesn't reduce victimization, which is also what's been found here. The difference is that in the U.S., it's also one of the findings has been that there is a perception of in the sense of insecurity, which you don't find in what Miguel presented. People said, well, yeah, we trust more the police, but we feel equally insecure. And this could be, I mean, for many reasons. I mean, what could be that really, I wasn't clear to what extent this was measuring community policing. I mean, I thought, I like the way Miguel put it as more like involvement of the police with the community, which encompasses a sort of a broad range of things, but not really sort of the strict use, that we have for or more precise for community policing. It could also be that just it's a statement about the different quality of policing in Central America versus the U.S., in which you may trust it by the police, but you know that they are not very capable. They don't have the resources to really protect you. So a second comment, and I thought it was also interesting, the finding that police misconduct is more frequently reported by young males. And I think if we were to do a breakdown of that by income, we will see that it's disproportionately higher even among the sort of the lower income youth. And at the same time, we know that youth and poor youth are the most at-risk group of violence, both as victims and perpetrators. So I think here, I mean, just for me, what's important to emphasize is that clearly, if we want to reach out to youth, I mean, police is not the first option to do it. And while there are many good reasons for why we need to strengthen the police and improve it and reform it and have better police, and Miguel also gave us today a few of sort of additional arguments more on the sort of political front and related to the political system. We need to be careful not to revert to the mistake that has been often made about sort of thinking that we're going to police our way out of this problem or incarcerate our way out of this problem. And this is a very complex problem that really needs to be tackled in an integrated way, both with law enforcement and strong prevention measures, and that it's multi-sectoral and that requires the, sort of a whole set, sort of toolkit of interventions. Some, like the ones were presented today, like the school-based violence prevention interventions that really deal with some of the risk factors that we know drive engagement or put people at more risk of engaging in violence. And lastly, on the findings, I mean, there were many findings that struck me. But one in particular was this, like in different ways, this trend, this pattern of people taking law in their own hands, and that we could see either sort of the police being scared of going to a community because of them being sort of victimized by people who are taking law in their own hands, or the findings on the private sector. I mean, and the private sector using the same tactics as criminals and extorting the extortioners, and I think, I mean, this last one on the private sector for us, it points to one of the gaps also in the literature, which is really the need for more victimization surveys of businesses. And if you compare the number of victimization surveys of individuals versus businesses, I mean, we need to do a much better job in understanding how businesses are coping, are reacting, are adapting, and to this problem. And that's something that we are working on. There's some very interesting work done in Mexico on this, and we hope to also be able to bring it to Central America. Finally, on sort of on the methodology, a few observations. I would urge the authors also to be a bit careful on the phrasing of some of the findings, because especially many of the statements sort of suggest causality when all we are seeing are correlations. Mm-hmm. And so instead of saying that perceived insecurity and victimization decrease life satisfaction or system support, I mean, we should be clear that these are correlations, and there could be many things. I mean, we really don't know which way the relationship goes. I mean, it could be that people who are less satisfied and don't like the governments are also just more prone to feel insecure because they have a negative attitude toward the system. So I would put a bit more caveats when presenting these findings. The same, I mean, I thought I was struck by this finding that one gang member joining a school would lead to 15 kids dropping out or moving out of the school, and I agree that that's the value of the qualitative work, that it allows us to to start getting a few of these dynamics. But I could also see how these kind of findings then take a life of their own. And I could see, like in a month from now, seeing a minister, in some country saying, putting this, not with all the caveats that are put here in the context of the methodology, but, and it's then again another way of also sort of putting the blame on the gangs when really it's the school that is not capable to protect the students from violence in the school. So just sort of some reflections on that. And finally, I like the graphs, but sometimes it wasn't obvious to me how things were measured and represented. So maybe for the graphs to have the meaning of the axis and the Likert scales are not reflected, so it wasn't always so obvious. And you have the percentage of victimization going from 1 to 100, but then the range of approval of President Joe was 51 to 55% only. Maybe, I'm not too good on these things, and but so that wasn't so intuitive or so obvious to me how they were constructed. But I really enjoyed the presentation, and I thought it was very rich, different perspectives, and it really helped me to understand a few things. And so let me conclude by congratulating again and thanking Woodrow Wilson for the opportunity to comment on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna open it up to questions here in a minute, but I'm gonna let the panel, if they want to respond to any of the questions that Rodrigo brought up, or you just want to open it up.
What do you want to do?
I may respond to something.
1 point?
Okay, then I'll
Go ahead.
respond to 1.2,
Go
but I'll
ahead.
make it really
Okay.
quick.
Go ahead, Liz.
I think the point about causality is a really important point, and when we show sort of bivariate relationships, the relationship between two variables, there's a lot hidden behind that. And some of the work that we're doing behind the scenes is in multiple regression analysis, which is still just going to get a correlation and not causality. But we've been doing, in my own work, I've been doing a series of experiments to try to get at how people's attitudes change when they're exposed to media stories about crime and violence. So we are doing some work to get at causality, but it is a tricky thing because we can't, I'm someone who does a lot of experiments, but I can't ethically assign someone to be, randomly assign someone to be the victim of a crime and then someone else who, not, and then compare their attitudes, which in the, from the point of view of an experiment person would be the ideal, but not from the point of view of an ethical person. So we can look at the people's reaction to news stories about violence and begin to get at this causal story of how does sort of the climate of crime and insecurity affect people's attitudes, and we're just beginning to analyze those data. So I completely agree with you. We do have to be very careful. I think it's a wise caveat.
Miguel, did you want to throw in?
Yes. Well, thank you, Rodrigo, for these excellent comments. And just 1 point about this case that in the case of adult young males, if they are poor, they will be more victimized by the police. Actually, I thought that too, and I tested, but I was surprised to find that actually don't. No. So we have basically, it doesn't matter whether you are poor or you are middle class or rich. But basically all of them, if you're young and male, basically you are more victimized by the police, even if you are middle class or poor. So it crosses all classes in this case. Just that.
So your comment about the fact that when someone who seems to be a gang member comes into the school and a bunch of kids drop out, that this should not be told to the Salvadoran government? Is that what you're saying? We should not let them...
I don't know how it was measured, or if it was just one thing that you heard once, or if it was, something more sort of systematic, and to what extent, how much confidence you have in that kind of finding. Because, I could see also, this kind of...
Comments like this get repeated. It wasn't the first time it was said. And it's part of a complex structure of what's going on. because the school principals are saying that, yeah, when they take in a couple of new kids, that's good. They fill up the quota. They have to fill up the quota of kids in their school. And that means that the Ministry of Education will then pay the school a certain amount of money. It's good for the school to reach this goal of filling up the seats in the school. The schools are not supposed to have empty seats. So the school principals are happy. But the school teachers who get this kid in the class are not happy about getting the kid in the class. So then they get so it's positive for the principal, not good for the teachers. Mediation is being taught to everybody. Some teachers, it's reported, don't want to mediate. They're afraid of the gangs. I didn't mention some teachers are getting murdered in El Salvador, in the school property, okay, or in their home. So it's complicated. Mediation has all kinds of repercussions, and it's not always a happy one for everybody involved.
Great. All right, we have time for questions. I just ask that you speak with a mic because that way people who are following us online can listen in. I'll start over here with Chris Ash from the State Department, and we'll take 2 or 3. Maybe, Gabriel, you could get 2 or 3 over on that side, and then we'll come next to this side. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks. I'm Chris Ash. I work on citizen security and Central American affairs at the State Department. You hear a lot of data points, and I know governments in Central America talk to us about this indicator was positive and we made progress here. We focus on narco traffickers and kilos, but there doesn't seem to be the happy camper quotient of some sort of analysis that looks at beyond just the number of people who are victims. I mean, these people live in communities, and we're taking a more holistic approach to our citizen security engagement. It's not just about the crime, it's the communities they live in. Do they have effective schools? Do they have access to public utilities? Do they have access to health care? Is there a government presence? Are there opportunities for vocational training in these countries, which frankly have very few things for young people to do if they graduate? Income inequalities that prevent, government presence and services. So I think we look at the data points that show today we made progress, but is there any research that's going on that really takes the holistic approach of the communities? Because if you don't have all those things, it doesn't matter what the police have or the victimization. People will be unhappy, and you won't make long-term progress. You can just nip around the edges. And I haven't seen some sort of analysis on really the community itself that crimes are occurring in, what's missing and what should be there. Mm-hmm. So we can actually move forward versus, this says that, this chart says that, which really is meaningless at the end of the day for citizens. So,
right. Gabriel, there are a couple other questions right there. Why don't we do that, and then we'll move. The gentleman in the back there. Right there. Yeah.
So I guess my question is Professor Susan.
Could you just identify yourself?
Oh, my name is William, and I'm an intern at the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars. I'm doing investigation in organized crime. I'm also Salvadorian, and I came to the United States when I was 15. So I want to touch on the one issue that Professor Susan was mentioning about the one gang member getting to school and 15 kids leaving the school. I think I want to back up the argument because I personally lived through that issue. I went to a really poor school in El Salvador, and there were issues with gang. And one kid, I remember, was being a gang member, and my mom's first reaction was to get me out of school. Along with other families, you might know, Latin American families are pretty united, and if issues are spread out. So I really appreciate you talking about that because I think it's an important issue about gang, and especially when the kid becomes a gang member, and they also in school. It's like if the school was being contaminated in a sense, and I appreciate talking about that, and the fear of the families as well. Another issue that I want to talk about is Cocodes, and in Guatemala. I was also in Guatemala about a month ago, and I also work with indigenous refugees from Mayan regions. And Cocodes, I think it's pretty interesting, and I want to know what the relationship of Cocodes was with the indigenous group in Guatemala, because a lot of indigenous people reported being assaulted and leaving the country because of Cocodes going after them. So I was wondering if you could mention a little bit more between the relationship between Cocodes and the indigenous groups.
There one more question back in that corner. Otherwise, I'll give it to Miguel Diaz up here.
Yeah, my name is Javier Melendez. I'm from Nicaragua, but now I'm collaborating with Inside Crime here in Washington. My question is for Jose. and I'm sorry if I misunderstood what you say. You said that in your findings you saw that the places where there is a good perception about police forces, there is a relation with the level of participation, citizen participation. You saw a higher level of citizen participation. You say that? And my question is precisely about how do you measure the participation? Or what are we talking about? We are talking about solidarity, about densidad institucional, about public services satisfaction. Can you tell me something about that, please?
Okay, let's get to responses. We have time for other questions, so do you want to?
I'll just make a brief response in response to Chris. I mean, I think you're right that we need to know more, and in 45 minutes we can only sort of present sort of a small bit of the amount of data that we've collected. So we're just, as Miguel said earlier, just scratching the surface here. The data allow us to do two things. One is diagnose the problem. And we can drill down even more than we were able to show here. So, for example, to look at whether or not socioeconomic status distinguishes among the young males who are being victimized by police, we can do more and more in that regard. We can make the point that we made here that we need to be very wary of national averages and drill down to regional levels and to the metropolitan area to really understand the difference between crime levels at the national level and crime levels in these urban areas. And also one of the things that emerges from the data that you see here is the difference between crime rates of victimization and feelings of insecurity. So we can sort of begin to diagnose a problem. For example, that when you compare that chart of insecurity to the chart of violent crime victimization, there are differences. So it's not, those things don't always go hand in hand, and so that's important to know. So we begin to diagnose the problem, right? Then we can go even further with the quantitative data we have in this past round, ask some questions about evaluations of local services and for example, of local schools. We can begin to get at that connection between citizens' experiences and how deeply the state is penetrating into their area with quality services. And then I think we're hoping to do more in the next round of the Americas Barometer on that issue of state capacity. So to what extent is the state there in providing services, but as well the qualitative interviews, really give us maybe a little bit more insight into those questions on a finer, more nuanced level. But I think it's a good point.
Miguel?
Yeah, about citizen participation, yes, I said that in those communities in which you have high levels of citizen participation, you have more involvement with the police. How do we measure citizen participation? Well, basically the frequency in which people in the community attend community meetings, attend sport groups, church, anything that involves the participation of people in the community in different activities, different social activities. That's how we measure that. Let me just jump to this question that was directed to Susan. I just want to say something about this relation between gangs moving into the to schools and kids being dropped out because of that. Actually, and this comes from my research on gangs for many years in Central America. One of the things that we discovered soon in Central America is that as soon as, for instance, one kid is expelled from a school, when he starts, playing with guns or hanging with guns, once he is expelled from school, this kid who is not yet in the gang, formally in the gang, in that moment when he's expelled from school, he basically jumps right into the gang, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's a good measure, that measure of trying to keep these kids in the school system, because that serves as a sort of, prevention measure to go full force in the gang. Obviously, that implies a lot of problems for the school as a system. But I think we have, as Susan said, or somebody said, it is important, or Rodrigo said, it is important to look at that this problem has to be managed by the school system rather than by just the parents of the teachers themselves having to deal with gangs.
Yeah. Also about the gangs in the schools, we heard from a number of people that the gangs sort themselves out by schools. So if the two major gangs, the Mara Salvatrucha and the Calle 18, if there's one gang present in one school, there is no room for the other gang members in that school. So they divide themselves by schools. And they divide themselves by communities also. So you can't step across the street into the boundaries, the territory of the other gang, which means you can only be in that school, not this school, okay? So they also segregate themselves that way. But about the relationship between indigenous ethnicity and Cocodes, in Coban, there's a very heavily indigenous population in that area of Alta Verapaz and Coban in particular. And so the Cocodes focus group, and it was all Cocodes leaders in that group, they were all indigenous because that was the nature of the population of that area. However, in Guatemala City, where we do interviewing for this project, you get maybe 20% indigenous people who are Cocodes who are interviewed because that's what the population is like. So is there a one-to-one relationship between Cocodes and indigenous ethnicity? No, it depends on what region of Guatemala you're in. No? But the issue of whether it's indigenous people who do taking the law into your own hands is something that was dealt with by Regina Bateson of Yale, and who's done extensive field work in Guatemala. I think she spent a year in the field there. And she says very adamantly that it is not indigenous people who are taking the law into their own hands. That's what she has found empirically. Okay, but when you have areas that are highly indigenous and the Cocodes are indigenous and they're the ones who have the Junta de Seguridad, then they're indigenous Junta de Seguridad, they're doing that are trying to control taking the law into their own hands. They do two things. They're breaking the law in one way in that they're going around armed. They're not supposed to be armed, okay? So in that way, they're being vigilantes. But at the same time, they're trying to control the community's vigilante behavior. So there are opposing forces going on in these communities. The Junta de Seguridad, on the one hand, is legitimate. It's approved of by the Guatemalan government. It shouldn't be armed. That's not legitimate. But it's trying to put a control on the population at large that's trying to burn someone alive. So there are different things happening at the same time.
Rodrigo, I know you need to leave. Do you have any last parting words?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about respond to Chris's comment. I thought that's right on. I mean, if we, I think the same way that LAPOP shows the spatial heterogeneity that you have within countries, if you look within municipalities, you'll find the same heterogeneity. And you'll find communities, that are hotspots. And if you look at different types of crimes, again, you'll have different maps. And the sort of in terms of, I think one of the frontiers in terms of victimization surveys is to do that kind of work in a way that Chris was suggesting of looking at what are the victimization by communities, and then what are the characteristics of those communities? What are doing sort of risk maps that have to do with the accumulation of risk factors for crime and violence at the community level. And actually here, my colleague Alex Berg is doing some of that kind of work with us in Honduras. And maybe that's something, I don't know, that LAPOP can also do with its sort of powerful, surveys, infrastructure that it has. And thank you again.
Thank
Sorry
you very
that I
much,
have to leave.
Rodrigo. Yeah. Okay, we'll take a set of questions. Meredith has got the microphone back there, and I promise to come back over here. I won't forget you. But let's keep it short.
Yes, my name is Alex Sanchez. I work for the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. I guess my question is, going back to who is being victimized by the police, you talked about being young and male. How about is it when it comes to the ethnic factor? Are indigenous people being more victimized by the police than, people who are not indigenous looking, and is it worse in countries like El Salvador and Costa Rica as compared to Guatemala or Panama, for example? And my only other my follow-up question would be, have you seen an appearance of something like a national stereotype? For example, you have the Mexican cartels having a growing role in Guatemala, via Sinaloa, via the Zetas. Just as we were thinking that maybe Chapo may be there in Guatemala. So is there a stereotype growing that in Guatemala that if you see a Mexican migrant, this person may be a cartel member, for example? Thank you.
Okay, there's a couple more questions right there.
Hi, I'm Linda Adami. I work for Creative Associates. I'm a program manager for our Central America Crime and Violence Prevention programs. My question was regarding youth as victims and perpetrators of crime. What we find through our programs is that school dropouts are one of the major risk factors to youth joining gangs, as you have also mentioned. I was just wondering from your findings, and I know that you didn't have time to present everything that you found through your surveys, what were some of the community-based interventions, not necessarily the schools, that proved to be most effective in supporting these at-risk youth or youth that had dropped out of school?
Okay, and there was a question way in the back there, Meredith.
Hi, my name is Casey Cagley from George Mason University. I'd like if I could ask you to dig a little bit further into the community police issue. I'm interested to see your thoughts on the extent to which that model has really been implemented, especially in Guatemala, Honduras, for example, where I've seen a lot of literature that suggests that it's often a kind of a token implementation. A lot of junior officers are sent to those units, female officers, sometimes senior officers don't really buy into that program. So maybe it's implemented kind of under the paradigm of a more traditional policing, more authoritarian, whatever you want to say, whereas in perhaps Nicaragua, that's the community model seems to be more consolidated as the dominant paradigm. I'd like to get your thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to go first? Mia?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, who's victimized by the police? Other than what I show that young males are more victimized by the police than any other group, actually there is no, so far I haven't found any sort of profiling other than that, right? Young males being victimized more by the police, especially in urban areas, but I don't find anything related to race, at least not in Guatemala. But basically, the only place in which in Central America race will play an important role will be Guatemala, perhaps a little bit of Honduras. But even Guatemala, I didn't find anything like differences in terms of race. About a national stereotype, I don't think there is a national there is a construction of a national stereotype regarding cartels. There is rather a sort of a stereotype of gang member, of being gang member, right? That actually in the last years, gangs have worked to basically hide, right, and to look kind of more normal. Let's put it that way, in comparison with 5-8 years ago, in which they will tattoo over their face and everything. Now they no longer do that because they don't want to be singled out, but there's still some sort of a stereotype of the young gang member. If you use your hair basically cut and some ways of dressing, well, there might be, but actually I don't think there is a sort of national stereotype. And about I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah, just to address the issue of the stereotype of the gang member, if you talk to all these people today in all three countries, they're saying gang members no longer look like the stereotype of gang members. Mm-hmm. They're not tattooing themselves. In fact, they're getting rid of tattoos if they can. In El Salvador, they're wearing long sleeves to cover their tattoos. And in a hot place like El Salvador, that's a pretty sweaty thing to be doing. Their haircuts are no longer long because they go the opposite. They shave their heads. Whatever they used to do is the opposite. So if they used to wear very loosely fitting baggy pants, now it's super tight pants. So they're doing whatever is the opposite of what they used to do, so they don't look like the stereotypical gang member. And everyone is saying this to us in all three countries, all the stakeholders. The question by the person from Creative Associates, we are still in the middle of gathering data for this project, so we don't have findings to report right now. We have to wait for the 3-year project to end and then to analyze the data after it's all collected, because this is time data. We have to be comparing time 1, the baseline, with time 2 and time 3. So we really can't say what's effective and what isn't right now. No, we don't. We can't do that now. It's an experiment, so we can't report now. Yeah, that was about it, yeah.
Okay, there were some, Gabriel, could you come down this way? There were a few questions up here at the front, or if people don't mind handing the microphone down.
Actually, I do have something. Chris Ash, you wanted to know about the communities. Actually, for the project in Central America on crime mitigation, we did collect for every community all kinds of information on the communities. It was, we called it a neighborhood census, and we did find out about the infrastructure and what the communities have in terms describing the communities. So we do have data on that. That was the first step in the project.
Down to lighting and graffiti, but also, clinics and schools
Yeah,
and so on.
we have that.
Miguel?
Actually, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I want to jump on that. Actually, there's no related to LAPOP, but in the late 90s, we in the University of Central America conducted some studies comparing communities affected by gangs and those who were not, which were not affected by gangs. And what we found is that those communities affected by gangs lacked everything, right? But on the other hand, those communities that were not affected by gangs, even controlling by the same socioeconomic situation, and what made an important difference were like places of gathering, like formal places of gathering, like having a community, a community house, having a basketball court, having places in which young people can gather and can be, do different things. Whereas those places that didn't have these kind of places were very high in terms of gang participation. That was in the 90s.
Miguel Diaz, a consultant. Thank you, Eric. If I may, I would like to some clarification or maybe amplification on two of the data that you mentioned this morning. In your comparison between 2008 and 2012 in terms of police outreach and police trust and government legitimacy, I wonder to what extent the police patrolling with the military explains some of that improvement, given that the military generally is well perceived in the region. You also mentioned the increase in perception of government legitimacy in communities impacted by crime. I wonder whether that translates into support for illegitimate groups to provide security for these communities, whether through gangs or vigilante groups and so forth.
Okay, maybe a couple questions on that side of the table.
Hi, I'm Arilys Lugo, the Favorites, Howard University. I'm usually a Russianist. I'm actually feeling at home today. I don't know if y'all saw the Jon Stewart montage a couple of days ago of all the dash cams of people in Russia that now you have a dash cam to catch the police, corruption, or extortion going on, and occasionally the random overtipping cow truck. But this brings me to a question, which is, have your surveys shown any sort of reflection between the community relation to the police and their sense of the police being part of a greater network connected to the federal state? I know that in Russia that's part of the problem, that they see the police as part of this big corruptive network working into the court system, working into the lawyers, working up to the federal level. So if you don't grease the right hand up the escalator, you're not going to get anywhere. And I was wondering about how have you found freedom of access to subjects? I know that currently in Russia, it's really tricky. Generally speaking, you do have freedom of access as long as your subjects are not in jail. So I was wondering, which is actually an issue with community activists in Russia right now. There's still some leftover surveillance mechanisms. So I was wondering about that.
Okay, we have one more question, and then we'll.
My name is Carl Derrick. I was the USAID mission director last year in El Salvador. My question relates to the geographic focus in El Salvador. There are 53 municipalities with the highest incidence of crime out of the 262 in the country. And I'm wondering how that plays into your conclusions regarding national versus urban. I mean, did you actually go into neighborhoods that were under extreme violence and talk to gang members or families of gang members, or how did you do that? And how did you deal with the fear factor that the person that was doing the interviewing, that they were actually being trusted by the person receiving it?
Okay, we'll take one more right next to you. Make it quick, and then we'll give our panel.
Thanks. Alex Berg. I work on justice reform at the World Bank. First of all, just thanks for a great presentation and highlighting, I think, two of the issues that are really fundamental on police and on schools, which I think hasn't received enough attention. These issues. I have a couple questions, but I'll stick to one and maybe go to the other one afterwards. And that's on the community policing issue. You presented sort of an interesting mixed picture of, on the one hand, there's an improvement in citizen trust of the police, but on the other hand, no impact on perception of insecurity or victimization, which is, on the one hand, kind of a mixed picture. But what it suggests to me is a problem with the way that whole community policing models have been implemented in the region. That community policing, as it's been developed, is kind of a philosophy in which the whole police kind of subscribe to a different approach that increases confidence of the community so that they cooperate on reporting to the police and cooperate on investigations. But in the region, the way it tends to be approached is as a program where you have the regular police and then you have the community police and you have the investigators and then you have some other police that are interacting with the community. And you get some of what the qualitative findings have suggested is that, well, we trust some of the police, but we don't trust the rest of the police because most of them are still corrupt and abusive. And so I wonder if your data kind of sheds any light on that, if you see any variation between countries on that relationship, if you've looked at different models or different approaches of community policing, maybe in your qualitative research that sheds light in terms of how community policing is being implemented in the region.
I also added to that, and just a comment that came to my mind too, is that there's an irony and a juxtaposition to, on the one hand, promoting community policing and policía aproximación and all that sort of thing, and on the other hand, governments and policing using rapid rotation as a way to combat corruption, and making that kind of tie to the community extraordinarily difficult when you're rotating them out. And you hit on the language question, but it has a lot to do with that as well. But anyway, go ahead.
I'll just a couple of comments in response. One is on this question of the relationship between the police and the military, and then the police and sort of the broader system. Just two comments. Yes, the military is the most trusted institution other than the church in most countries in Latin America, and increasingly being asked by the government, but also by citizens, to play a role in these types of community-based patrolling and anti-violence programs. And one of the things that we did in 2012 with the Americas Barometer survey is asked a number of additional questions about citizens' attitudes toward the military, their experiences with the military, and so on. So we've begun to analyze those data, and so I guess this is sort of a, coming soon to a theater near you. We'll have more information on that. But one thing we've seen in the past that's sort of interesting and gets at your point a little bit, I think, is that there seems to be some spillover effect of when police ask for bribes, trust in the military goes down as well. And if Rodrigo was still here, he would say this is a correlation and not causation, and that's absolutely the case with the data analysis that we've been able to do so far. But it makes sense given that people work by making analogies, right? And so a person in uniform asks you for a bribe, and your trust in people in uniform goes down. So there is a sense in which people see police as embedded in a larger system, and that to us was just sort of one indication of that linkage that people are likely making. I think access to subjects, I'll just say a couple of things, but then maybe Miguel and Susan can say more. With respect to the Americas Barometer, this is occasionally an issue where we draw a complex sample design, and then we find that we can't go into certain neighborhoods because they're gang controlled, and we don't have access to the neighborhood. That with a larger Americas Barometer study, that's rare, but when it happens, we have to substitute out the community because we can't send in interviewers into a situation where they would be at risk. With the qualitative studies, we're doing our best to be as careful as possible for the interviewer's sake as well as the interviewee's sake. And so there we do a lot more legwork because we're going in more, to at-risk communities. We're not going into the worst communities, right? These are communities that no one can work in. But we're going into at-risk communities, and we do a lot of legwork beforehand to make sure that we can access the community and access the community safely. And that includes talking to community stakeholders and sort of winning the trust of those people, and then having those people sort of sometimes accompany the interviewers as they enter the town and so on, and act as a bridge. And so we're taking safety as seriously as we can, and we're implementing a number of steps to ensure that we can access the subjects, but also ensure the safety of the interviewers and the interviewees.
Regarding this question, Miguel, about whether trust in the police may be up because of this association with the military, I really don't know. I haven't tested that. But the military have been involved in security, public security tasks, not recently, but for many years in most of Northern Central America. So I really don't know what to expect. But actually, that question brings me to an important point regarding community policing, speaking in El Salvador, whether this we can talk about community policing in El Salvador. I'm not using community policing in case of El Salvador. I rather use police involvement in the community because I'm not sure there is and this is my personal view, I'm not sure there is a really institutional commitment to community policing in El Salvador right now. It's been rather this mixed attitudes from the authorities towards community policing. They will, from my own research, I know that, in general, officially they will say, yes, we're engaged in that, but actually, if you examine most of the more important, policies on the ground, they seem to all the time pull back to, the traditional sort of repressive measures, mano dura kind of measures. So it's a kind of mixed attitude toward that. And I would say that is kind of prevalent in Northern Central America. So I don't see a sort of a complete engagement of institutions in this idea of community policing as of now. Maybe there are some advances. I would say there are some advances in comparison with the past, but I'm not sure we're there yet. And at least not in the sense that, for instance, the Nicaraguans have done. The Nicaraguans, and this to respond the other question about these different models of community policing are being implemented in Central America. Actually, Nicaragua stands alone because they adopted this sort of different approach to the problem of security long ago, right? And they have been characterized by this sort of different approach, rather focused on citizen participation and prevention, rather than mano dura policies. So, and I think that has given the Nicaraguans some sort of advantages controlling crime and controlling insecurity in the case of Nicaragua. In Northern Central America, I see rather this sort of internal struggle within the same institutions trying to move over this traditional perspective on policing.
Yeah, to get back to this, the issue of the relationship between the police and the military, in almost all we asked this question about what do you think about the military trying to keep the peace here, and the police officers were all very negative about working with the military because the police said that the police officers don't uphold people's civil rights, their constitutional rights. They shoot first and ask questions later.
The police or the military?
The police say that about the military.
Military.
Yeah,
Okay.
This is the police's view about working with the military.
Okay.
Not the people's view of the military, the police's view, yeah. The question you asked about how the communities were chosen for the Central American project. I didn't mention that this is a USAID-funded project, and it was USAID that chose the communities. Once the communities were chosen, but they were chosen as not to be the most violent, the hottest of the hotspots, for the safety of the interviewers. And it was decided not to interview gang members themselves, but to talk to people who who were living in communities where there were gang members or had contact with gang members, but not in the very, very hottest of the hotspots. Within each community, there was a random sample of people chosen. This was a random sampling, then within each community. And what do we do to get access? First of all, we all obey our Institutional Review Board guidelines. Everyone has to give informed consent. Every person who's interviewed, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, has to give informed consent to being interviewed. And yes, but I know for the qualitative, when we go in, it's with people of the community who introduce the interviewer to the people who go around with this person, so they recognize him, so they get to be familiar with this person walking around the streets who they've never seen before. So yeah, this is for the protection of the interviewer and to enable the interviewer to get access to the other people. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this morning. I'm sure there are many more questions here, but would you please join me in thanking our panelists, the folks And thank you all. If you're not on our mailing list already, please join. Leave us a business card. We have many more activities coming up next month and in April. We have some specifically on Central America coming up on the 9th of April with special prosecutors on organized crime from Central America and a number of other activities. So please sign up if you are interested. Thank you. Thanks a lot.